America's most obscure cults. The Finders, 1980s to early 2000s. This secretive group coalesced in Washington, D.C. under the leadership of Marion Petty, a former military airman who framed the community as a communal living experiment and a kind of counterculture think tank. Members shared resources, lived collectively, and homeschooled kids with unconventional methods that emphasized self-direction and travel. In February 1987, the group exploded into headlines when police in Tallahassee, Florida, detained two well-dressed men traveling with 6 unkempt children in a van. The kids were hungry and bug-bitten but not seriously injured. The incident triggered searches of Finders properties back in D.C., where authorities seized boxes of documents, photographs, and computer files. Early reports described strange materials, travel logs, notes about child-rearing experiments, and international telexes. Some agents initially suspected criminal exploitation, including alarming references in a customs memo, but federal reviews later concluded they found no evidence of a kidnapping or trafficking ring. The children were reunited with their mothers, and charges in Florida were dropped. Rumors of intelligence ties further muddied the waters. A 1993 news magazine story reported that D.C. detectives were told parts of the inquiry were a CIA matter, while the CIA publicly denied involvement, saying any overlap was likely due to a contractor that had employed people associated with the group. Official documents released years later show multiple agencies looked hard at the Finders and did not substantiate the most lurid claims. The group's communal core faded by the 1990s and 2000s. Former members say a few adherents pursued offshoot projects, but as an organized entity, the Finders receded into obscurity, leaving behind a case file that still fuels speculation. The Blackburn Cult, 1920s California. This one is often misdated. The Blackburn Cult, officially the Divine Order of the Royal Arms of the Great 11, operated not in the 1970s, but in the 1920s in Southern California. Founded by May Otis Blackburn and her daughter Ruth Wayland Rizzio, the movement promised divine revelations dictated by angels and a coming new age. Followers decamped to the hills outside Los Angeles and Simi Valley, where sensational stories swirled about secret rites, animal sacrifices, and miraculous resurrections. The darkest episode involved the 1925 death of 16-year-old Willa Rhodes, whose body was interred beneath her family's home surrounded by the bodies of dogs, reportedly in the hope she'd be restored to life. Other disappearances and alleged deaths were whispered about, but prosecutors never secured murder convictions. Authorities did, however, indict Blackburn for grand theft tied to money extracted from followers. The sensational trial in 1930 helped collapse the sect. The Blackburn saga stands as a cautionary tale of apocalyptic promises, charismatic authority, and financial exploitation, just from an earlier era than most people remember. Synanon, 1958 to 1991. Synanon began as a groundbreaking drug rehabilitation program in Santa Monica, founded by Charles Dederick in 1958. It popularized the game, a confrontational group session where members challenged one another's behavior for hours. As the organization grew, it morphed from rehab into a highly controlled community. By the mid-1970s, Dederick had declared Synanon a religion, partly to shield it from scrutiny, and began issuing draconian edicts, mandatory head shaving, forced partner swaps, and heavy pressure for vasectomies and abortions. An internal enforcement arm, nicknamed the Imperial Marines, intimidated defectors and critics. The violence broke fully into public view in 1978, when a rattlesnake with its rattle removed was placed in the mailbox of attorney Paul Marantz, who had successfully sued Synanon. He survived the bite. The incident triggered raids and a cascade of legal defeats. The IRS later revoked Synanon's tax-exempt status, and by 1991, the organization shut down. Synanon's legacy is double-edged: its early influence on peer-based recovery and its notorious slide into coercion and crime. Zendik Arts, 1969 to 2013. Founded in California by artist-polemicist Wolf Zendik and later led with his partner Errol, Zendik Farm billed itself as an eco-art revolution fighting death culture. Over decades, the commune relocated from California to Texas to North Carolina and eventually West Virginia, financing itself through street sales of magazines, art, and branded gear. Publicly, Zendik preached creative freedom, sustainability, and communal living. Former members, however, describe a tightly controlled hierarchy masked as free love. Leadership-approved relationships. Pairings could be made or broken at the top's discretion. Daily life could be grueling. Long workdays, public shaming sessions, and pressure to cut off outside ties. The rhetoric was green and liberatory. The practice, many say, was isolating and manipulative. After Wolf's death in 1999, Arol intensified control, according to defectors. The farm dissolved in 2013. Years later, ex-Zendiks still unpacked the psychological fallout from a utopia that felt more like a cage. The Source Family, 1970s Los Angeles. From a top-grossing vegetarian restaurant on the Sunset Strip to a hillside mansion with incense and guitars, the Source family was the glamorous face of L.A. counterculture. Leader Jim Baker, ex-Marine, judo black belt, restaurateur, reinvented himself as Father Yod, a mystical patriarch with 13 spiritual wives and about 140 followers. Members worked in the wildly popular Source restaurant, lived communally, followed strict diets, and recorded an avalanche of psychedelic spiritual rock under names like Yahovah 13. Behind the aura of enlightenment, Father Yod maintained absolute authority over money, work, sex, and ritual. In 1974, the group decamped to Hawaii. The next year, Yod attempted hang gliding with no formal training. He crash-landed and died hours later. Without its charismatic center, the community dispersed. The restaurant closed, the family fractured, and yet the myth endures. Surviving members still gather, reissue the music, and tell stories of a sun-drenched dream that burned out in mid-flight. Buddha Field, 1980s to 2010s. Operating largely under the radar in Los Angeles and later Hawaii, Buddha Field coalesced around a charismatic teacher known as Michel, later revealed as Jaime Gomez. Framing himself as an enlightened master, he led devotees through intense meditation, elaborate dance performances, and strict emotional discipline. Members were urged to detach from negative family influence and surrender fully to the path. Former insiders describe a darker reality: manipulation, isolation, and sexual coercion cloaked in spiritual language. The leader cultivated adoration while insisting on secrecy and purity, even as he allegedly groomed male followers for abuse. The group's low profile shattered with the 2016 documentary Holy Hell, which paired 2 decades of internal footage with survivor testimony. After the revelations, Michel relocated to Hawaii and attempted to reassemble a following under new guises. Despite exposure, some adherents remained loyal, a testament to how devotion, once forged, can be brutally hard to break. Aggressive Christianity Missions Training Corps, 1981 to present. Founded by James and Deborah Green, this paramilitary-style ministry began in California and later ran compounds near Fence Lake, New Mexico. Leaders styled themselves generals, complete with uniforms, marching, and martial discipline. Members labored for the ministry, homeschooled children within rigid doctrine, and were told the outside world was corrupt. Former members describe isolation, harsh punishments, and authoritarian control that pervaded daily life. Beginning in 2017, New Mexico authorities arrested multiple leaders and followers after a multi-year investigation. Deborah Green was convicted on child abuse and sexual offense counts and initially sentenced to decades in prison. James Green later pleaded no contest to child abuse charges and received a prison term. There have been appellate twists since, including a temporary victory for Deborah Green, later reversed by the New Mexico Supreme Court in 2025, which reinstated a key child abuse conviction. However you cut it, the legal record documents a pattern of exploitation and harm, cloaked in militant piety. The Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God, American Connection? This apocalyptic sect formed in Uganda in the late 1980s around prophecies of the Virgin Mary. Leaders predicted the world would end at the turn of the millennium. After a missed doomsday date in 1999, catastrophe struck on March 17, 2000. Hundreds died in a locked church that burned to the ground. Subsequent searches uncovered hundreds more bodies at associated sites, many poisoned or killed earlier, pushing the death toll toward 1,000. Authorities ultimately concluded it was mass murder orchestrated by leadership rather than a voluntary mass suicide. What about the U.S. angle? Over the years, claims have circulated about recruitment visits and donations touching American churches, and rumors that some leaders fled toward the U.S. after the killings. Documented evidence of formal U.S. backing, however, is thin, and the extent of any American involvement remains unclear. What is clear is the global lesson. Apocalyptic manipulation isn't bound by borders, and the casualties can be staggering. These obscure cults show how dangerous movements can hide in plain sight, behind communes, restaurants, art collectives, ministries, or spiritual workshops. The patterns repeat: a charismatic authority, isolation from families, financial and sexual exploitation, coercive control, and a story that promises salvation while extracting obedience. Many such groups persist in new forms today. Staying informed and skeptical isn't cynicism, it's protection. If this kind of difficult history matters to you, stick around for more deep dives. And remember, ask hard questions, verify claims, and trust actions over words.